Andy Ty. He's at the Metropolitan Police Command Centre, Gold Control in South London. Well, Andy, we were about to find out. It looked pretty peaceful on the street there for the moment. Is that the situation, the picture that you're getting?
Yes, very much so. I mean, we've also been able to look over the shoulder, as it were, of some of the officers here, monitoring all these CCTV and helicopter cameras around and over the city, and frankly it seems pretty quiet at the moment, what you might call a mopping up operation. And really the mood here also is a pretty calm, pretty confident one, that they have dealt with whatever's happened today as best as they could. There hasn't been the amount of violence that was talked about on some of the chat sites on the internet preceding today's demonstration itself. The police did manage to contain it, broadly speaking, to the Royal Bank of Scotland site and the nearby streets. And I think it's, if you like, the stragglers from that demonstration who they're now dealing with. The total number of arrests so far is 24. The police, I was speaking to one senior officer a little earlier who talked about some of the demonstrators, a minority, but nevertheless some who hadn't been in contact with them beforehand, who'd been deliberately provocative, set on causing violence, and indeed some of those arrests clearly relate to that. We've got a number of people on public order offences, aggravated burglary, breach of the peace, that sort of thing. But of course it isn't over yet. There could be more demonstrations planned. There's tonight, there's tomorrow, and of course as far as the police are concerned, they have now accumulated a great deal of potential photographic evidence, which they will now be following up.
Andy Ty, thank you very much indeed. We are now in a position to go back to speak to Ben Brown. He's been in the city at the heart of those demonstrations today. Ben, I was just saying it seems reasonably peaceable. Is that the situation there now?
Yeah, it is right now, Nick. What you've got just behind us here is a line of riot police right outside the Bank of England. That's one of the walls of the Bank of England on Threadneedle Street. A few of the demonstrators, as you can see, having a kind of sit-down protest there on the road. To be honest, they don't have much choice, because at the moment they're being penned in by the police. They're not allowed out of this area. It's a sort of lockdown, and it's been like this for a few hours now. So the protesters actually not allowed out of this road and all the roads around the Bank of England. So all the protesters who are here at the moment don't have much choice. They simply cannot leave, and they're getting pretty bored and frustrated. The story of the day is really that the demonstrators came here at about midday. They converged on the Bank of England from 4 different underground stations and made their protests outside the Bank of England. They hung an effigy of a banker from some traffic lights, put up banners, put some graffiti on the walls of the Bank of England. Then there were some ugly scenes when just a little bit further up Threadneedle Street behind me, the Royal Bank of Scotland branch there on Threadneedle Street was attacked. The windows there were smashed. Some of the protesters actually went inside. There were scuffles between riot police and protesters, and there's been sporadic scuffles through the afternoon. But as Andy Ty was saying, really, I think the violence hasn't been anything like on the scale that some people were fearing. A few arrests, a few injuries. We've talked to a few protesters who had blood on their faces and injuries. They say they can't actually get out of this police cordon now to go and get those injuries treated by doctors.
Ben Brown in the city, thank you very much.
In fact, it was left to one of the peaceful protesters to try to stop the attack. He was ignored. There was even an attempt to set fire to the bank, put out by police who are now occupying the building. The skirmishes continued through a long afternoon. Paul Davis, ITV News in the city.
Well, joining me now with the latest from the city is our UK editor Angus Walker. Angus, tell us what's going on behind you.
Yes, I'm about a couple of hundred yards from the Bank of England, and behind me the bulk of the crowd have been penned in by police in riot gear for 6 or 7 hours. And there's a couple of lines of riot police have moved down in the last few minutes. Throughout the day there have been sporadic clashes between the police and protesters. People inside have been telling me there's been an uneasy calm for most of the day. Some things have been thrown. I've seen quite a few people are being arrested. Scotland Yard say 24 people have been arrested so far. But it looks like it's going to be a long evening for the police and protesters. As I say, many people here have been effectively trapped in front of the Bank of England for 6 or 7 hours.
All right, Angus Walker in the city, thank you.
Police clashed with G20 demonstrators. 32 people have been arrested so far in connection with the protests. Sky's chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey reports.
The ancient streets of the City of London filled to the sounds of anger. It was predicted and promised by some. As thousands reached the Bank of England at its centre, it erupted. A battle of wills between a massive police force and smaller but determined groups of protesters. Hijacking any peaceful intent and goading whenever possible. Bloodied men gesturing at the police. Crowds shouting in anger and unified chanting. It's lasted for hours, demonstrators pushing and shoving the police lines. Some trying to get onto the Bank of England steps. Others trying to get out and unite in larger numbers. Occasionally, the pushing turned more violent. A police officer smashed over the head. And demonstrators hit with truncheons as they tried to break the police lines. The Royal Bank of Scotland building fast turned into a symbolic target of the anti-capitalist demonstrators. It wasn't long before its windows were smashed. Demonstrators dancing through the shattered glass with glee. As police sensed an area was getting too dangerous, they moved in reinforcements, men and horses.
The police obviously decided that this part of the Bank of England is becoming a little bit troublesome, and they brought the horses in. But of course the crowd have now moved towards them, which is scaring the horses, and it raises the temperature, if you like, as people now, as the police then calm it down and try to control the crowd again. But obviously they've decided that this area of the bank is getting out of hand.
For many here, bankers and the banking industry in general were the focus of their attention. Corralled in front of the Bank of England, the effigy of a banker was hanged from a traffic light by demonstrators. Soon, it was set alight to cheers from the crowd. It was an act destined to guarantee that the protesters would be kept inside and cut off from the rest of London by the police for many hours.
Day one of the demonstrations designed to bring the city to a standstill. Many will consider this mission accomplished. But the police too will feel satisfied. Violence, yes, but totally controlled. A massive lockdown, expensive, but ultimately contained. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, in the City of London.
Hundreds of nations have fallen to tyranny in the last century alone. This is our last chance to not relive history.
As they're finishing off this agenda, they'll be pulling the rug from underneath Americans at home.
They have tremendous influence on our president and Congress, and they really are calling the shots.
Now is the time for all good men and women to come to the aid of their country.
I think it's incumbent upon all of us as American citizens to pay attention.
One of the greatest events in history is taking place before our very eyes.
Don't sit out. I have a question for this young man. He has the right to be represented.
It's up to every man, woman, and child in the United States to decide whether we're going to be fooled by the slick propaganda of the social engineers or whether we're going to restore the republic.
The last vestiges of our free system of government are being swept away. Fall of the Republic. Volume 1, the Presidency of Barack Obama. Available on DVD at Infowars.com.